Hello and welcome to season two, episode three of Why Postliberalism Failed. I'm James Patterson. With me, as always, is my co-author Thomas Howes. It's August 1st, 2025. We're recording slightly later in the day, and so we're having weird lighting issues with Thomas as he is in Florida for vacation. If it looks like his head is being swallowed by the shadow, it's only because of all of the nastiness we'll be talking about today. Today's a long-awaited day, Tom, for some people.
Oh, why is that? Is it because are we talking about Croatia?
Yeah, we are doing Croatia today.
All right.
Croatia is an example of post-liberalism that is in its most extreme variety. And unlike the Vichy section that was mostly written by Thomas, I wrote the Croatia section. And so I'll be doing a lot of talking, which means that there's going to be a lot more, um, I don't know, sarcasm, trolling. Like I don't know, like it's going to be meaner. Thomas is definitely the nicer one between the two of us.
So,
Uh,
so
yeah.
what contemporary post-liberals would you say are closest to the post-liberals in Croatia?
Well, the Croatian post liberals we're talking about were terrorists.
Oh,
And so I don't know. Like I genuinely don't know. Let's see.
probably the Integralists down in Brazil, maybe now.
Yeah. The Integralist Remnant, the AIB Remnant, is also a terrorist organization. Not great, but I'm trying to think. Are there any post liberals that recommend revolution and the extermination of dissenters? I guess that's got to be Femister and Crean, right? Like at least
I
in the
don't know.
latter
Do they? I
one.
don't. Everything's so abstract for them. It's hard for me to take them seriously as a mo movement.
No, that's right, right. Yeah, if you gave them like the dictatorship of a country, they would probably just give it back. They,
Hmm.
I'm just talking about in terms of things they say or like things they're willing to permit.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but I can't think of any. There's really no analog for how bad the Croatians were.
Hmm.
Um, Earlier today, I was looking at memes because I'm 45 and I make really good use of my time when I have a book due. But there were like these Balkan reputations, like of different of what they looked like, and it was meant to be a joke that like they all look the same, so it was the same face. That they're all the same people, and there were like these very slight differences. And the one in the for the Croatians was they were wearing a Nazi helmet.
Oh.
That will tie in to our discussion today. Yeah, so I can't think of any analogs.
Mhm. Well, that's good.
Yeah,
Progress.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Most people today that advocate for this, I mean, for post liberalism, still have confidence that they can work within the system to overturn it.
Hmm.
And that is a position that is much more amenable to the soft-handed academic who doesn't want to actually do any work. They just sort of want to, and ingratiate themselves to people in power and then tell them what to do without taking any of the risks.
Hmm.
Um, you know.
Yeah,
Anyway,
academics are kind of disappointing like that, aren't they?
yeah, and I fully include myself. Like I'm not itching to go out there and make moves. Like don't give me any dictatorships either. No, thank you. So let's
Yeah,
talk about
James,
Croatia.
James,
Oh
we
yeah,
we can't emphasize enough how little funding we've received from foreign leaders.
yeah. Oh, I was talking trash the other day about there's like this new translation of Raspale's The Camp of the Saints, and there's a publisher. I think they're called Valbon. Is that what it is? And there is a wealthy French right wing guy who funded something by that name, but it's just a place in France. And I was like whinging about how this right wing funder is behind the publication of this book, and it turns out I was. It was the curse of me having bad French, where like I misunderstood the ventures. So apologies to all the people on social media I scandalized. The 0 to 5 people that saw that tweet. Uh, but yeah, I could get it. I can get into some trouble. This is the peril of being an academic. You start to become a subject matter expert, then you just become an expert, right? And this is how you go. This is how you go from Adrian Vermeule being an administrative law expert to an expert on the common good and Catholic political thought. No idea what he's talking about. But you're at HLS long enough, you just tend to think that you're just the smartest person in the room, no matter what room it is. So I don't know how I got off on that kick. I think I'm still kind of embarrassed, is really what it is. Like, I just.
So I'm confused. What exactly happened with the Camp of the Saints thing?
Oh, so I don't know, man. I'm not sure how interesting it is, but yeah, there's an English language publication of this book. It's pretty reprehensible book, and it shares the name with a project that a right wing billionaire in France is funding. So I thought that he was funding the book,
Mm.
and he's not. I think that's like a passion project. Whoever's running Valbon Books, um, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know who it is, but they like personally responded to me, kind of making fun of me for being stupid. So
Oh, well, aren't they also like besides Camp of the Saints, which I mean, the joke's kind of on them for publishing Camp of the
yeah, I'm
Saints, but
stupid.
don't they
I'm
also
stupid for
publish
not
other
checking
white
my work. They're
nationalist stuff?
stupid for publishing racist books.
Yeah, yeah. No, they don't get to call you stupid.
No, I shouldn't tweet stupid things though. Anyway, I don't know why I'm confessing my sins on this podcast. So let's just move on to Croatia instead of this nonsense. By the way, the reason why I'm occasionally going to fall victim to just rambling like that is for whatever reason I could not get to sleep last night. So I'm a little tired, and I'm overcompensating by drinking an afternoon coffee. So I'm like
Mm.
really running at the mouth right now.
Well, you already wrote a poem today about Garrigou Lagrange.
Yeah, and I made a mistake in that one too. I'm having a good day. Yeah, it was the hillbilly Thomists are supposedly writing a song about Garrigou Lagrange, and so I made a verse about him supporting Vichy, um, per our last episode. All right, so let's talk about Croatia. For those of you who haven't listened to us talk about the historical cases in the book, it's worth reminding you we didn't do this with Vichy quite as much. But the general outline of each of these cases is we provide an overview of the political history leading to the moment. So, whereas when we're talking about the post liberals of the moment, of like the interwar period in Croatia, we consult academic texts on that. But when we're talking about what led up to that moment, we just sort of describe things generally without getting into the weeds of particular historical claims. So they're more like encyclopedia entries until you get to when we're talking about Croatia, Integralism, the Ustase, and Ante Pavelic, and all that. So then we get into that case, but just to remind people, Croatia's it's just on the eastern side. Is that the Adriatic Sea? I always forget.
Yeah,
Yeah, the Adriatic Sea, from Italy.
that's right. It
Uh,
used to be part of the Kingdom of Venice, I think.
yeah, it was occupied by Venice. It was its own independent kingdom at one point. It lost its king in 1526. They were fighting the Ottomans, and the king died. And as a way of essentially protecting Croatia, they elected as the heir Ferdinand I of the Holy Roman Empire, and so he is Habsburg, and that way what they're doing is they're linking Croatia to the Holy Roman Empire, and it's really much more about like connecting themselves to the Habsburgs that are like the Christian kings defending in that area. Um, and as it turns out, like it's an important move. The Habsburgs conquer Slavonia in the late 17th century. The Turks begin to flag in terms of their ability to fight wars. In the early 18th century, the Habsburgs are cleaning up in the Balkans. But unfortunately, they can no longer sort of exploit the declining fortunes of the Ottomans, as the rising power of Prussia, was threatening their northern position. So there's this weird detente that emerges between Turkey and the Habsburgs during the 18th century. And so during the Napoleonic Wars, Croatia gets conquered relatively easily, becomes part of what's known as the Illyrian provinces. Nothing, I mean, things happen there, but in terms of like what's going on the continent, Croatia is not one of the central locations. I think I described, yeah, I have the chapter open right here. It's kind of a backwater of the war. And when the war's over, the Illyrian provinces are they essentially split the Croatian people between Dalmatia, which is coastal, and Croatia, which is more northern. And the split is a problem because with these two kingdoms under Austrian Empire, there's two Croatian essentially provinces within the empire that want to be one province, and increasingly they want to be autonomous and at a certain point independent, which is not going to happen in the short term because after the Hungarian challenge to the Austrian position in 1848, you have a compromise between the King of Hungary and the Austrian Emperor, forming what's called the dual monarchy or the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Hungarians actually get to control the kingdom of um, Croatia, which they bind up with the lands of the crown of St. Stephen or Slavonia. So they create something called the Triune Kingdom of Croatia, Slavonia, and Dalmatia. But Dalmatia is not in this Triune Kingdom. It's a separate kingdom controlled by the Austrians. And the joke is that this is an arrangement that can only make sense in the Balkans. Like it is just like the Balkans are politically so complicated and so difficult that you will have two kingdoms claiming Dalmatia and only one of them having Dalmatia. And so this already begins to point to the problems that Croatia has in terms of its own sort of national identity, is that it's split. It's been subjugated into two separate kingdoms that they don't necessarily like. And it's at this point where we really start to get in to more of the post-liberal movement beginning to surface. You have Pan-Slavism, in which Croatians, Serbs, and Bosnians, to a lesser degree, these other groups are trying to, Slovenes, they're trying to create a separate state from Austria. And after the First World War, they formed something called the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes after they've like had something called the Zagreb Resolution that they were going to create it. So I'm kind of going out of order here. And almost as soon as this kingdom forms, the constituent ethnic identities start to fight each other. And a big reason why the problem was so bad was that it was a constitutional monarchy, and the monarchy was Serbian and it was Orthodox. It was Orthodox Christian. And so Croatians, who are mostly Catholic, do not like this, especially Catholic clergy, who feel like they're being frozen out of the clerical political apparatus. So that's being reserved primarily for the Orthodox. But the interests of the Croatians in the kingdom of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, before it becomes known as Yugoslavia, are actually not that religious. There's two parties. One is the Croatian Peasants Party. They're the more important one. The more Catholic one is the Croatian Populist Party, and they're more like social Catholics. They're more what we would consider sort of centrist readers of the Catholic social teaching of Leo the 13th. And they campaigned on the idea of Croatia, the cross and the plow. So there's a much more of, I don't know, like a kind of agrarian workers alliance that is more socialist, although not, in the Catholic sense, in terms of Catholic socialism. And so the Peasant Party is more anti-centralization of the kingdom. It's anti-Serbian, and it's also more secular. It's not as into religious politics. And by 1921, there's a constitution under this king that's fully ratified, and within 8 years, Croatia falls apart politically. It's a disaster because the whole Pan-Slavic mission was something of a ill-conceived form of nationalism, given how difficult it was for these ethnic groups to live together as separate states. I should pause there. That's a lot. That's sort of like the sort of leading up to the moment where the Croatian case begins to move in a post-liberal direction. Um, so what do you have to say about all this, Thomas? I don't know how to transition to like a resting moment from all of that.
Okay, okay, so that's so you got past World War One there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Kingdom of Yugoslavia, is it right? And that's
Yeah, that the Kingdom of Yugoslavia starts after the Constitution falls apart.
okay. And that's so we're into like the 1920s right now.
Yeah,
Okay. So all right, so we're into the 1920s. Uh I'm guessing that we're going to see a rise of Croatian nationalism.
you got it.
Okay, and
Yeah,
see, this is I'm with the listener here because I don't know this very well at all. So did they get really into Mussolini or Marat or something too?
they got really into Mussolini. You had two choices,
I just
and you can
guessed.
choose both. So I guess you got three. You
Okay.
certainly can't choose neither. And But they got in with Mussolini. So Mussolini is important here, not just because he's eventually going to be the prime minister and dictator of fascist Italy, but also because the kingdom of um, uh, I guess Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. I've been getting the three of them in the wrong order. I have no idea what the right order is. I'm not a very careful reader of my own chapter. I guess I need to. The kingdom had actually received in the outcome of the First World War a fair amount of territory that Mussolini had wanted. Remember, Italy sort of flips in the middle of the war and starts to fight with the Entente, and they did so with the aim of securing Dalmatia. They want the coast on the eastern side of the Adriatic Sea, and they did not get it. And so Mussolini really wants to get that land, and the objective for him is to figure out a way to infiltrate or undermine or affect in some way Yugoslav politics to make that happen. And one of the sources for that would be the Croatians. In fact, that's the best source given that they live in the territory that he wants. And so there are these three parties that are fighting for influence in Croatia within the kingdom of Yugoslavia. And then I'll be very brief here because I know the average listener is not going to be like enthused about the idea of listening to interwar Croatian political parties. You might exist if you do, though. If you're a person who's that enthused, this is probably remedial for you, right? You probably know this already. But there's the Peasants Party, um, which we've already talked about, the Populist Party, and then there's like a weird allegiance of growing nationalist parties, like the Croat Union and Croat Party of the Right. And the Croat Party of the Right is a small party led by a guy named Ante Pavelic. Remember that name. So the Populists, although a smaller party, are in a coalition in parliament to prop up the constitutional monarchy. And the problem is this man's name is Radic, who leads this effort. Is that by 8 years into the kingdom, it is completely in crisis, and there begins to start being murders. And when you have parliament members murdering each other, usually there's going to be some kind of dictatorship or there's going to be some kind of coup. So on June 20th, 1928, Serbian deputy named Punisha Racic, I have no idea if I'm saying these right, murdered a Croatian party member, that being Stepan Radic. And they did this because the Croatians had accused the Serb of stealing from the public. Um, and the outcome of this was that King Alexander the First imposes a dictatorship, and that's the end of the parliament for the time being. And because Radic is the one murdered, he's the leader of the populists, and the populists had upheld the constitution. As a party, they really ceased to exist. There's no constituency left in Croatia that wants to uphold what's perceived as a Serbian king, who will undermine the constitution as soon as it no longer works for Serbs. That's the perception in Croatia. And so these smaller nationalist parties began to eat up the share of, which wasn't a large share, but it was, it was enough of the populists that they begin to contest the peasant party. And the person who is really the one who benefits most of all that was Ante Pavelic. And Ante Pavelic is going to be the person we're going to focus on from here on out, because he's the one who is able to deal with the politics of Croatia in Yugoslavia, and as well as the surrounding states that were sort of contesting Yugoslav positions. So think Hungary, think Italy. And so under this dictatorship, there is a pretty significant move to nationalism among Croatians, but there's also a distinct movement away from parliamentarianism. As you might expect, that the Yugoslav parliament isn't going well, then they believe that really what they need is an independent Croatia, but an independent Croatia that operates under a dictatorship or some form of primarily executive rule with very little in the way of elections. Now, the idea here was that you would mobilize to secure this position, not by engaging an outright political organization like Pavlic, but in the formation of Catholic Action. We've talked about Catholic Action movements in this, on this podcast many times. And the reason that they matter is that the church out of the Vatican didn't like the idea of Catholic political parties, especially Pope Pius XI. He really did not like the idea of confessional parties as much as he liked the idea of kind of like a civil society of people to generate a sort of culture of civic virtue. And so this was more of an association in Catholic Action. And in all of the cases that we've looked at, these Catholic Action groups almost immediately become hotbeds for young people to shift Catholic populations both to the right, but also into an authoritarian direction, which was probably not what Pius XI was about. But given the politics in a lot of Catholic majority countries in the interwar years, there wasn't a lot of hope for anything better. So this Croatian Catholic Action that emerges is, however, subject to crushing repression by the Yugoslav dictatorship. They were originally called the Eagles, and the Eagles are banned because there's a general ban against tribal, religious, or regional affiliation groups. And so, in order to sort of reconstitute the Eagles, the Catholic Church itself in Croatia creates something called the Great Crusader Fraternity and Sorority. But they're effectively the same organization, and they operate under the slogan of God, Church, and Homeland. Now that's familiar. Like this is these sort of these triune statements are essentially like rhetorically borrowing from liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Mm-hmm.
And in each of these, what you're seeing is a kind of refutation of French Revolution ideas or liberal ideas as they understood them on the continent. So, the only thing that's missing here is like from Vichy. What is Vichy's? Do you remember?
I think it's let's see, travail. It's a work. Was it work, family, and fatherland? I think.
Yeah, and there's similar ones in Spain and Portugal, and this is the one that you get out of Catholic Action here. So when you look at these three things, they're actually pretty good. You know, I like God, I like the church, I like my homeland. There's nothing wrong with all this. It's just that like what they mean by these terms is often, uh, what one expert in the field, who is this one? Beyondich says is a radical Catholicism and integral nationalism. So here meaning sort of integral nationalism meaning a concept of Miraz. So these groups are not political parties, but they do create greater sort of well-feeling and civic organizations that then lead to joining political parties that more match God, church, and homeland. And that is not the Peasants' Party. That, as I said, was the more secular party. So Pavelic has a party that is more about that, and that's called the Ustache. And the Ustache, by the late 1930s, consists of the former Catholic intellectuals almost entirely from the Crusaders, and they are all in the Ustache. They're not in the Peasants' Party, and they all believe that the Peasant Party was not leading in the direction of an independent state, and that only an authoritarian system would facilitate the national unity needed to achieve independence. And
So do you
so
think today's post-liberals would probably join the Ustache party?
so if your choice was between if you're a post-liberal and your choice is between a nationalist, separatist, secular Republican party, little r Republican, as in like you want to create an independent parliament, or a nationalist, integralist, authoritarian party, which do you think they would join? These are your two options. The answer is clearly the Ustache.
Yeah.
And now, what the Ustache go on to do, I don't know if all of the post liberals that we talk about today would necessarily support. But like we said last week when we were reading out of the Integralism book by Femister and Crean, there's nothing internal to their positions that really provide an opposition to them. It's more like, they'll just use the word prudence. It's like it's imprudent to kill hundreds of thousands of Serbs. We'll get to that. I'm sorry if I gave that away. Unfortunately, that's spoiler alert for historical events that happened almost 100 years ago. So anyway, why are you baiting me? You're trying to make me like you're.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm getting baited. So
Yeah.
anyway, I guess you're baiting me because if I get punchy, then maybe this historical review isn't quite so, grueling. But now we're here. We're here because the formation of the Ustache is in 1927, sort of initially, but the real formation of the party, the date that's given is January 7th, 1929. And one of the things that early on Pavelic does is he actually reaches out to Mussolini. And he does this because Mussolini could assist with prying Croatia out of Yugoslavia. And in exchange for that help, a lot of the Dalmatian territories that Mussolini wants, he can get. So it's a weird kind of Croatian nationalism where they're willing to surrender some of their own nation that they don't even have yet. But the thing about these guys is that their way of doing politics is different from the Peasant Party. The Peasant Party sort of tries to organize during the dictatorship to resist centralization under the crown. The Ustache, they form terrorist camps. So they have like military camps that they start with Croatian expatriates in Hungary and Austria, and they go to Pavelic is sort of flying around doing this or taking trains most likely. He's eventually tried in absentia by the Yugoslav government and found guilty of high treason. And as a result, he's actually exiled from Vienna while he's there trying to do this. And because of this, Mussolini offers him a villa at Pesaro, and was essentially told that he could do whatever he wanted. So there's a Hungarian terrorist camp. The Hungarians want to sort of contest for territory in Yugoslavia, so that's why all these groups are helping. And of course, Italy is more than happy to take him in. And at this point, Mussolini's doing this not because he's a big believer in Croatian nationalism. He's doing this because he doesn't know what's going to happen, right? But this is a low-cost way of investing in a potentially disruptive force in a territory that he hopes to annex. So having the Ustase leader in his back pocket is inexpensive and a good wager. So, the fascist government in Italy, as I think it's McCormick in his book Croatia under Ante Pavelic points out, that they were poorly organized and perceived as an insignificant group that could be more of a political liability, which they'll eventually be. So, what did the Ustase believe? Well, unfortunately, they're basically Catholic integralists, but also a terrorist organization. And so the things that they wanted to do are familiar to us. They want to have a corporatist economic regime, which is a kind of nationalist autarky in which there's very limited exchange. There's no there's the imposition of sort of import bans and cooperation between classes. This is a classic political economy of fascist states and clerical fascist states like Slovakia and France and Spain, not France. And the only sort of state that doesn't really fully adopt this approach that we treat is Portugal, and that's because Salazar is an economist and he kind of knows what's up. But they're corporatist. They want to have a centralized administrative regime led by the Poglavnik, or the dictator. So they have yet another feature here of Führer principle. It's what that concept is in Croatian. And they desperately wanted to exterminate Jews.
I'm sorry,
yeah,
James. Portugal actually did have a corporatist.
Oh, it did?
Yeah, yeah. So they, what you mentioned some of the things, but the big thing was this corporatism sprang out of the nostalgia for the guild system. So they have a modernization of the guild system by having all these different industries represented by government. So it allowed the government. It basically created these sort of official guilds almost within the government that could regulate their industries. And so it was modeled against competition. As opposed to competition, you have more cooperation. The problem is, just like the guilds, it was just a, what do you call it? Cronyism run amok, a limitation of competition in the marketplace. So it tended towards like stagnant economies. Almost all of the corporatist economies were stagnant. The only, outside of acquisition through war, until, and we talked about this last year with Franco, how he sort of moved away from his fascist economy and autarky and all that under the council of Opus Dei advisors, and then you had the Spanish economic miracle. But everywhere it was tried, corporatism was a big old failure. It was all based in nostalgia about guilds, and now we know from more recent economic historians' work that guilds kind of sucked. So
yeah, I was thinking more in terms of import export than I was in terms of internal economic restructuring.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I guess Portugal probably was more free trade with other countries
because they were connected to the British. Mm-hmm. And because they were a sort of junior partner in the trade relationship, the British didn't let them.
Yeah,
have autarky. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that Salazar in Portugal really insisted on was the limitation of foreign investment and ownership of Portuguese stuff. So, mm-hmm. So in that sense, it was also corporatist there. But the one thing he didn't want was to have mass starvation. That's what Franco got. We were talking about like the period before the Opus Dei reforms is called the Hunger Years.
Yeah.
From the end of the Spanish Civil War until the 1950s, there's just widespread famine and starvation in Spain because of his use of autarky. So these consequences aren't just that you have fewer choices of soap or
Yeah.
fewer flavors of Oreo. It's that you have no choice over food because there's
Yeah.
no food.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, thanks for catching me. I was playing a little too fast and loose
Oh
there.
no, it's okay. Gives me a chance to say something. I don't know much about Croatia, so I'm
Yeah,
I'm back to the
I should make more mistakes.
no, no. Keep going.
Anyway, yeah. So the story with their position on minorities was radical use of violence, and so the way that they handled Jews and Roma was that as soon as the Ustache were able to secure political control over Croatia, is they rapidly exported them to concentration camps. But when it came to the Serbian Orthodox, they wanted to handle them themselves. Um, and an odd feature of the Ustache is they actually did not have that big of a problem with Islam.
Hmm.
They regarded Muslims, who are primarily Bosnian, as essentially Croatian ethnically, and
Hmm.
so even if they're like not the right religion, they're fine. It's a weird exception. You run into these, and I'm assuming there's some kind of expedience to this.
Hmm.
But it's the same with the integralists in Brazil, where
Yeah.
they accommodate certain minority faiths, but they identify Catholicism as the sort of national religion of the Croatian people.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting that uh, what's his name? Pater Edmund says that the Iranian government is better than the government of the United States. So he has sort of a there's sort of this horseshoe thing going on with the integralists and the um, sort of radical Islamist regimes.
Yeah, I have to wonder if that's part of what's going on here. Although I think because Islam itself hasn't undergone its kind of uh, um, its own sort of ideological nationalism, right? Of the trying to remember, is it called the I just forget the term, but there used to be a term that was used back in the old post 9/11 days about Islam as like its own sort of state, like an essential attempt to recreate a single Islamic state.
Hmm.
Um, Not ISIS itself, but that sort of a way of doing things. That kind of thing had not surfaced yet. That's actually beginning to happen at the time of the 1930s when this is all
Okay.
going down, but it's not in Bosnia yet.
Hmm.
This is something more that Hitler is trying to inspire. But anyway, that's way outside of my area of expertise, so I'm just going to
Hmm.
stop there.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. The thing about Croatian Catholicism is that it was the signal difference between them and the Serbs, and it was a material difference because the perception was that the Serbs always had one over the Croatians because they had the royal family, and the Orthodox Church was in better position than the Catholic Church. And Pavelic is a devout Catholic, and we see this with people like Franco and Joseph Tizo, who I guess we'll have to do an episode on, of very personally pious people becoming very successful at using that piety as a source of influence. And so
Mm.
this is from McCormick. As a devout Catholic, Pavlich reckoned that the Croatian peoples had been chosen by God to defend Catholicism against assaults from both orthodoxy and communism. This religious zeal held by some Ustache, which demanded no tolerance for orthodoxy, helped give a mystical and almost biblical quality to the Ustache movement. According to Pavlich and his minions, Croatians had been warriors and martyrs for Christianity and needed to continue the good fight for their independence, which would only strengthen them as the bulwark of Christianity. To the Ustache, Croatians faced both political and religious enemies who were determined to destroy Croatian culture, its traditions, its languages, its political life, and its religion. In other words, Ustache ideology encouraged some aspects of holy war. And so you can see here how like this last set of beliefs really sort of locks it into place for a form of clerical fascism. We have Führerprinzip, we have corporatism, but the most important thing we have here is a friend enemy distinction
Hmm.
between the friends that are like between Bosnian Muslims and the Croatians, as well as
Hmm.
Italians like Mussolini, and the enemies that are the Serbs, the Jews, the Roma.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of the political being the friend enemy distinction that's in Carl Schmitt, and by way of Carl Schmitt, um, people like Adrian Vermeule, is just at the same heart, right? Remember, Adrian is an advocate for this idea of an executive-led administrative state. And so there are these very strong resemblances between the political institutions that Adrian imagines as the best sort of post-liberal institutions, and these historical institutions that lead to genocide. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if Adrian's advocating for genocide, but he's advocating for the institutions that led to them.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he doesn't take that threat seriously.
Well, he doesn't take it seriously. That's his. I mean, he thinks that we're all tyrannophobes if we take it seriously. Yeah, but this guy. So apparently, this guy, he was a devout Catholic, so his
Yeah.
piety didn't save him from committing genocide.
No, and this is one of the weird fantasies you get from a lot of the more um, theologically inclined post liberals, where there's a kind of magic to baptism, not
Hmm.
grace. There's grace to baptism, but that there's also magic, which is that it just makes you a better person because the annihilation of original sin, bearing now only the effects of that original sin, means that you experience in grace a sort of elevated moral sense.
Hmm.
And here you have, just like Franco, a man that was receiving sacraments and engaging in genocide.
Hmm.
And in the case of Croatia, with the cooperation of a significant number of Catholic clergy,
Hmm.
which we'll get to in a minute. So,
No, he
um,
didn't set out to commit genocide in the beginning. What were the sort of seeds of it that
no, he 100% set out to do genocide from
Oh, okay.
yeah, he is a Croatian nationalist from the beginning. I don't know if he's like as enthused about this sort of thing, but as early as like 1936, he issues this manifesto in which he gives an
So
account.
there wasn't any like slippery slope thing. It wasn't like we're going to set up we're going to start, send all the Serbs to El Salvador.
There was zero lag time between
Yeah.
the Ustase seizing control of the independent state of Croatia
Hmm.
and the forced conversions, mutilations, acts on women, that I'm
Hmm.
not allowed to say on YouTube, and I don't want to get us an explicit rating. There was zero lag time for any of
Hmm.
these things that were performed on these groups. In the 1936 manifesto, he kind of imagines all of this more coherently, and you're going to see some overlap with all the other cases we've talked about. So
Hmm.
who are the people that he targets as enemies, like in the
Yeah.
Schmittian sense? Well, they're the Freemasons. All right. He says Freemasonry does not attack uh, any of the Croat party politicians who demand Croat autonomy on the basis of democracy in the framework of a Yugoslav state, because these are in part themselves connected with Jewry and Freemasonry. It acts exclusively against our independence movement, which is neither Masonic nor democratic, but which fights for the full liberation of Croatia and for an internal order built on sound nationalistic principle. He, of course, mentions the Jews, um, and the Serbs, and then finally the communists. So these are a kind of
Okay.
revised version of Marat's four peoples, right?
Yeah.
Marat has the four people. It's Freemasons, Jews, foreigners, or immigrants, and I always forget the fourth. Um,
Protestants.
oh, Protestants, yeah. So now instead of Protestants, you have Serbs, and you have the Jews and the Freemasons, and instead of immigrants or foreigners, you have communists, people coming
Hmm.
from the outside and infiltrating. So it's just a revision of the friend enemy distinction. The original sort of list of people are mostly Serbs, Jews, and Roma. But in his manifesto, that's meant to secure greater political support, he adopts something that's more of the moment of Marat and other forms of clerical fascism.
Now I know in Franco's government they had a whole department dedicated towards the against the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy. Did this guy
Yeah,
have like a department? Was it?
it was the army, and it was
Okay.
also it was the Catholic Church
Hmm.
in Croatia. The thing about the Ustache is that they don't last that long, and he's definitely not an institution guy. So
Uh-huh.
it's really just like I said, it's really more of like a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
Like the Ustache are basically Catholic Taliban. All right,
Yeah.
they are less concerned about building state institutions for organizing political power and more about just engaging in as much violence as possible. So
Okay.
any energy that they seem to dedicate to institution building is really just to perpetuate more violence or to satisfy their patron in Nazi Germany, who's there, and Italy, I guess,
Did
for a
this guy,
while.
besides Mussolini, did this guy read any of the other reactionary thinkers that we've seen before?
So, the research I did didn't really talk a lot about Ante Pavlic's influences.
Hmm.
With Franco, we have, a lot more work on this. And a big reason for this, I suspect, is that when it comes to studying the Balkans, the languages you have to learn are very difficult to learn because there aren't as many speakers in proximity to the people that do this kind of work. And
Hmm.
so, you were, lousy with sources on Vichy, right? There's a lot of French speakers, and Vichy's very interesting. And I was lousy on sources with Spain because there's a lot of Spanish speakers and there's a lot of great scholars there, but there are not a lot of Croatian speakers. And a lot of what you're dealing with here is in Croatian. Now, there are a lot of Italian speakers, but I don't really think Italian's going to help you very much here. You have to know things like Serbian and Croatian. I don't know how much there's a difference there. Some people say there is one, some say there aren't. Um, but it's not a common language. I had two sources that I used. One was from a chapter in a book on clerical fascism. Another was by a really great book by a guy named Cormac. But like with the Joseph Tiso section, I was really kind of at a loss for academic sources because I don't speak Croatian. I don't speak Hungarian, which I would need to know in order to do
Yeah,
Tiso.
we're already late with this book. We would never finish it if we had to learn all
Yeah,
the
if I
languages.
fire up the Duolingo and start trying to teach myself Slovakian,
Yeah.
I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So I'm really held hostage by what sources I have available, and so we don't have someone that's actually done, or I couldn't find someone that's done the work on Ante Pavlic's sort of intellectual development.
Hmm.
Um, what we have instead are the things that he sort of produced, and they're bog standard right wing clerical fascism, right? Like Jews and Freemasons collaborate with the local non-Catholic population and foreigners to undermine the throne and altar, and I, as dictator, will use the army to defeat our enemies and reward our friends. And that's what he does, right? But in order to get there, he has to wait. So remember, he's in when we last left off with what he was up to, he was in a villa. All
Hmm.
right. But what's funny is that he goes to a jail later. And
Hmm.
the reason he goes to a jail is because the Ustache are busy. Um, the dictatorship in Yugoslavia comes to an end in 1931. A guy named Milan Stojanovic, Jadanovic. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to any Serbians out there. Becomes prime minister, and uh, the Sojan Danovic is considerably nicer to Mussolini. They get along pretty well, and this is at a period when Mussolini is still opposed to Hitler, or not Hitler isn't around yet, but he's still opposed to a rising German force. And it's important to a lot of other players in Europe that Yugoslavia and Italy get along
Hmm.
because they would form a kind of southern front against any kind of German expansionism. So this is considered by most people a good thing, which means that Pavlich, as this kind of powder keg of terrorism, is inconvenient. And so, in order for the Ustache to gain influence in a relatively stable environment for the Croatians, he has to start engaging in terrorist acts in Croatian parts of Yugoslavia. Now, this was done essentially to pry loose the Croatian support for the Peasant Party, and it's not going great. These random acts of violence, but with the Ustase ratcheting up the terrorism, eventually they have to put Pavelic in jail. And while he's in jail, you start uh, why is he in jail? Well, he's part of a group of people that organized the assassination of King Alexander the First of Yugoslavia. So that's a bit of a ratcheting up, right? These like sort of there's an attack on a military installation, and so uh, this is actually an international incident, and it's done in cooperation with a Bulgarian nationalist organization, abbreviated to mean the VMRO. I can't say the actual name here, but they're also a terrorist organization. And when Alexander the First dies, he doesn't even die in Croatia or in Yugoslavia. He dies in France because the Bulgarian nationalist attacks him when he's on like a state diplomatic envoy with France, because France is trying to keep the peace between Italy and Yugoslavia. And so the French diplomat that's there is actually harmed, a man named Louis Barthou. He's injured during the attack. The terrorist, the Bulgarian terrorist, dies at the scene. And so the Ustase level up, right? This is why Pavelic has to go to jail, but he doesn't get executed or extradited. No. Mussolini's going to hold on to this guy because you never know, right?
Might need him.
Yeah. So after this, he's in prison in Turin, right? If you're going to be in prison anywhere, I guess Turin's not too bad. It's better than like some Siberia. Anyway, the government in Yugoslavia responds to this pretty badly. Like they don't like their king getting assassinated. So there's a massive clampdown on the Ustase. And it is exactly the kind of thing the Ustase needed in Croatia to eclipse the Peasant Party. Because now that it looks like the Yugoslavians are being targeted, however rightfully, mind you, it's enough to kind of use that persecution as a binding force for the Croatians. And so the Peasant Party is considered sort of insufficiently nationalist. So the Ustase get a tremendous amount of support. And because of how significant all of this is, you also among a Catholic population, you also have a strong effort of the Orthodox clergy in Yugoslavia to turn down a concordat that the Vatican was negotiating with the crown in Yugoslavia. So in 1937, they've reached this concordat, and the church, the Serbs and the Orthodox Church, demand that it not be signed, and they succeed. And so now the Croatians have a second reason, right? There's the cracking down on their population, and there's also the Orthodox intervening to undermine the Catholic position. So the result is that despite all of these groups, all these people in the Ustase getting suppressed, is that people become more interested in them, right? This is the Streisand effect at work. And so by 1939, as the Germans are rolling into Poland, the University of Zagreb has newspapers like the Croatian Nation that are, run by the Ustase. And there's really very little the Yugoslavian government can do to suppress this independence movement. But what really seals the deal here is that Hitler and Mussolini in March of 1941 want Greece. And they say to Yugoslavia, sign the tripartite pact that makes you an ally with us, and sort of secretly also Spain, although Spain can't really do anything, and let us in through Greece. And there's this like consideration by the ruling king at the time, who was a regent named Paul. He was waiting for the actual heir, Peter II, to reach majority. So he was not a king; he was a prince regent, and he actually is kind of okay with this initially. And as soon as people figure this out, the English and the Americans immediately prompt a coup, and a palace coup, oust Paul, put Peter II as king at the age of 17, and then they lead a defense of Yugoslavia that lasts an impressive 12 days. Nice. All right. And then the armies, steam through Yugoslavia and take Greece. And at that point, Yugoslavia is a mess. It's over. Right. And that and Mussolini can put Pavelic in Italy, and I mean in Croatia, and do his thing. And he starts
Mhm.
the independent state of Croatia um, on April 10th. There's a nominal Prince Aemoni of Aosta becoming King Tomislav II. And he's really there as a head of state. The head of government is, and dictator is Pavelic. And here are the numbers on what Pavelic was able to do. So by the summer of 1941, so this is a few months, Serb men, women, and children were pushed from cliffs, plunging to their deaths. Whole villages of Serbs were annihilated. The Ustase reveled in the bloodlust, employing various acts of torture, such as skinning and burning victims alive. Um, a kind of sexual mutilation was widespread and was embraced by the especially wicked. Some Serbs were hacked into pieces with their noses, ears, and tongues cut off. These techniques were often meted out on Orthodox priests. Um, and the fabulous Orthodox cathedral in Banja Luka was raised as the local Catholic bishop watched, and its place was constructed Ante Pavelic Square. For good measure, Banja Luka's Serbs were annihilated in anticipation of turning the city into Croatia's future capital. Uh, so there's no records. So there's only estimations, and the very lowest estimation of the number of Serbs killed or forcibly converted, rather, was 90,000, but the highest is 300,000. This was all done as the Catholic opposition to forced conversions was, according to McCormick, tossed aside. There were two priests that were especially vicious. Father Dragutin Camber and Miroslav Filipovic murdered hundreds of Serbians themselves, like with their own hands, while Croatian members of the Franciscan order taught that the death of Serbian Orthodox would strengthen the Catholic faith. And Archbishop Ivan Saric of Sarajevo wrote poems praising Pavelic for his efforts under the independent state of Croatia. All told, between 172,000 and 290,000 Serbs, 31,000 to 40,000 Jews, and 25,000 to 40,000 Roma died. The volume and rate of death shocked even the Nazis, with General Edmund von Glaser-Hornstau, Horstenschau. I've been talking a lot, so I'm like losing control here when I have to speak
Oh,
anything other than English. Stating the Croat Revolution was by far the bloodiest and most awful among all I have seen firsthand or from afar in Europe since 1917.
holy cow. Now you said there was Archbishop was supporting this, or were there other
Yeah.
bishops supporting this?
Um, there was one who wasn't,
Okay.
and talking about him is going to be complicated because he is beatified.
Oh,
His name is if you're Croatian, you know this guy. It's very important. His name is Archbishop Stepanek. And I'm Stepanek, rather. I'm sorry. I'm not going to be able to say his first name. It looks like it's Alozji, but I can't say his name. So he was the Archbishop of Zagreb, so the capital of Croatia at the time. Now, before the Ustache began what they were doing, he was very much a nationalist and wanted independence because he shared with the Ustache position that the crown was and the Serbian Orthodox Church were very very bad to the Croatians, and he associated what they were doing with Freemasonry.
mhm.
And this was something that he especially began to adopt as an explanation after the failure to ratify the 1937 Concordat. So he was very excited with the independence that he was able to enjoy briefly after the collapse of Yugoslavia when Mussolini and Hitler came through. But what happens in May in 1941, like almost as soon as any laws can get passed in the independent state of Croatia, you get the Croatian race law. And this is the law that essentially authorizes all of the terrible actions that occur against Jews and Roma. And at this point, Stepanek is in trouble because he's essentially welcomed in this nationalist movement, failing to really appreciate how bad it is. And in some ways, kind of sharing some of their paranoid preoccupations. And So, in order to explain exactly what was at work here, requires a kind of moral compass that's hard for American audiences, which are primarily who listen to us, to understand. So, the way that Stepanek tried to like essentially defend himself was to insist on his own authority as a bishop. He didn't like the idea of Pavelic kind of like overtaking his episcopal authority, because the more that he could preserve that authority to himself, the more he could try to intervene in the worst cases, like those priests that were killing people with their own hands, right? Biondic has a great way of describing this problem where people look at this and they can't believe that he's not doing more than he did. Says the church episcopacy was not to blame for the policy of forced conversion, but its narrow defense of its prerogatives, understandable enough under most circumstances, appears somewhat perplexing given the extreme nature of the Croatian government's policy. Its tactic of diplomatic dialogue is even less understandable if one remembers that many converts to Catholicism, whatever their background, were still being persecuted by secular authorities, and that these same authorities repeatedly flouted church prerogatives. But what else could the man do? All right. Like he is alone among his own fellow bishops in many respects. And no one under him listened to him. As Bionich also concludes, it is doubtful whether a decisive public condemnation of the Ustase regime would have altered the political situation in Croatia if he had issued one, or brought an end to the abuses of that regime. That such a public condemnation would have saved the moral image, honor, and reputation of the church seems undeniable. However, by not taking such a step, Stepanek, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, so I apologize to everyone. And the Catholic hierarchy remained indirectly associated with the Ustase regime. So that's the problem here, is that he essentially sacrificed a long-term moral witness of the Catholic Church to a short-term convenience. And honestly, very hard call to make. There's nothing he can do to stop what's happening, right? Mm-hmm. This is a slaughter. And he can like stand in the way with his hands, like stop, and his own clergymen are ignoring him. Mm-hmm. And so there is one guy who doesn't quite do enough. And what's crazy is that like they commit that many atrocities, but like the independent state of Croatia is out of there by 43. Like the Italians capitulate in September, like Mussolini's hung from a street lamp or something. And the Ustase like try to seize land that they had given to Mussolini to get it back. Hitler intervenes to stop them and secures the land for themselves. The Eastern Front's collapsing slowly. You have different like the Polish, you have the Warsaw Uprising, you have all these different Eastern Front organizations that are working with the Russians. And Pavelic actually tries to consider how he might try to flip so that he welcomes in the Russians in some way. But before that can get very far, the plot's discovered by the Germans. He ends up having to sell out the two conspirators and has them executed for treason. And so by the time Berlin falls, Pavelic is on the move. He doesn't really have a place to be because a guy named Josip Broz Tito, who will eventually become the communist leader of Yugoslavia, is pursuing him. And so they try to go into Austria. The Austrians send them back. And so Pavelic figures out there's nothing he can do. He gets a fake passport that makes him look like, I think he's Peruvian. and he does what he does best, which is he escapes to Italy again, and he
Mm.
kind of floats around the Vatican. He has a lot of Catholic help because of his sort of reputation as a devout person and the influence that he'd once had in Italy. And he was sent to Buenos Aires in 1948, where Perón was protecting a lot of former fascist and Nazi leaders. And when things started to go south in Buenos Aires, he eventually makes his way over to Franco. And before he gets there, though, while he's still in Argentina, the Serbian communist attempts to assassinate him. The guy fails, but it sort of injures him, and he has a nagging injury. So when he gets to Franco, Spain, he's not in good health, and he eventually dies in '59. And you know, it's during Tito's reign that Stepanich becomes beatified. Really, in the early years, he's still sort of like caught up in a lot of the right wing sort of paranoid reactionary politics, but it was his moral witness against the Tito regime that really clarifies his moral position. But there's no such salvation for Pavelic. He spends the rest of his life trying to get back to Croatia and running the place.
Wow.
And like there's but the whole scale violence that this man imposed in the course of barely 2 years, a little over 2 years, at the most exaggerated point, is just inconceivable.
Mm-hmm. Yikes. I mean, you said they had a reputation for being devout. Like, didn't people kind of start to question that after a while?
Well, we've talked about this.
Mhm.
The tight relationship in a lot of these countries between the church and the state, these reactionary governments that emerge, means that if you are a devout Catholic, means that there's at least a question of if you're a devout Catholic, are you also, a nationalist that wants to go kill Serbs?
Yeah.
And that question is not. It's not just like it's not an irrational question because you're living in the country surrounded by the graves and the sites of genocide. Like you live in the area where there's genocide in the recent past. Like there's going to be maybe not living memory anymore, but at least like people that remember being told the horror stories.
Yeah.
So it's the thing about Croatia, and I have to. This is I'm originally trained as a guy that does American government, so I've had to learn all this stuff very rapidly. It's part of why the book's late is I wanted to do my due diligence rather than just use sort of stereotypes or Wikipedia entries to do this kind of work. I wanted to do the reading, as it were.
Hmm.
Is that it may have been slightly different in Croatia because how they were occupied by communists,
Hmm.
and communist occupation would also be a cause for greater secularization. We see that in the East-West divisions in Germany, where East Germany is very irreligious. West Germany has much more church attending.
Hmm.
The only country that escapes that is Poland, but Poland has a very good reason for that, namely Pope John Paul II being
Hmm.
Pope during the end of the Cold War. But I think it's a 1-2 punch in Croatia. It's
Hmm.
associations with fascist and genocidal madness, and then the imposition of state secularization by Tito.
Yeah.
You feel gross?
Yeah, that's pretty rough, man.
The I used to be at least a very fast writer. It was one of the few things that I could do in academia well. And it's like this section of this book completely destroyed that aspect to my ability to write.
Mm.
Because I would wake up, this is the only thing I had left to do in the chapter, and I would stare at the source material and I couldn't do it. I had to
Mm.
sit there and I had to write about the singular villain. And I finally was able to finish it, But I was only finally able to finish it because we had just moved to Knoxville and there was literally nothing else for me to do because my entire life was in boxes. So I would just take the books that I had brought with me in a suitcase and go to a cigar lounge and just write. But real nasty business with Pavlich, and it is not a person. He's not a person. The Ustache is not a party that you see post liberals cite. Right? They are not enthused by this. They talk about Franco. They talk about Dolphus. They'll talk about Salazar. They will not talk about Pavlich. But when you look at what Pavlich was up to, the rationale for his for his regime about authoritarian government, the need to integrate from within by fomenting revolt and achieving a new post-liberal sort of elite, and the politics of friend and enemy, and collaborating with international allies in order to secure political authority, all this stuff that post liberals do or say they want to do or outline in books. He did it. He did the same things, and I don't understand why they don't celebrate Pavlich, considering he was the most successful post liberal out of all these guys in some respects.
Some respects. Although he didn't, he relied on terrorism because he didn't have a ton of buy-in, right?
Yeah, there was no there in the end. Like the Croatians, bought into him because they were buying out, they were selling out from Yugoslavia.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but public support in Croatia was more based on a kind of comprehensive Croatian desire for revenge. But in many cases, you had just regular Croatians that just didn't want to get crosswise with any of this. And so they just stayed in their houses.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was
Yeah.
almost not enough time for there to be a building resistance within Croatia to Pavlich.
Mm-hmm.
And even if there had been, um, until Mussolini's defeat in Italy, you had two states right next to you
Mm-hmm.
that he was collaborating with in Italy and in Germany, that would have bailed them out. It would have been a lot harder for them to do much. Um,
Was he the worst one you've seen?
he's the
Like as far as
worst.
evil? Yeah.
Yeah. Like when we look at the worst, um, it's not close.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I think the total number of dead under Franco is higher, but he had more years, way
Mm-hmm.
more years.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and then there's also Tiso in Slovakia. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why Tiso ends up not being quite as bad is there was actually one person or a couple people who were actually worse than him.
Mm.
And so, like on a relative scale, there was a guy named Tuca who was worse. And Tizo's able to kind of save himself by being, on a relative scale, a very attenuated relative scale, somewhat better. But there's just nothing but Pavlich and murder. And the rate at which they kill people or ship people to concentration camps during the time that they have is really uncontested.
Mm. Dang. Oof.
I think that might be another reason why people don't write about this. Is do you want to know particularly what informed Ante Pavlich's ideas? Do you care? He was a monster. What else do you need to know?
Huh. I mean, I'm just curious if if it was just tribalism for him, or if did what I'm in trouble trying to understand what it was, how the guy prayed and went to church while this is all happening.
Uh,
Um,
he believed that he was in a holy war against international and domestic enemies, and the only politics that he knew was the politics of the bayonet. And what is a whiff of grape shot? More than a whiff, uh, to refer to a rather infamous post on Twitter.
Wait, what was that?
He's a slightly more than a whiff of grape shot. Do you remember this?
Uh-uh.
The conversation about the good society between Adrian and
When Adrian Vermeil
great,
said
is it
called
Connolly?
Franco's regime the good society because
Yeah,
it would put
whiff of grape shot.
communists and what was it? Communists and socialists to work on the fields so that they could
Yeah.
redeem themselves.
Yeah, and there was this language about the whiff of grape shot that was used, and it's like, well, if you like a whiff of grape shot, guess what Pavlich has got for you? All right,
Yeah.
he's got a whole containers of grape shot that he uses to shoot down Orthodox cathedrals and then shoot the faces off Serbian and Roma children.
So I'm
So
guessing Catholics are in Orthodox probably don't get along very well in Serbia anymore.
no, 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 and another way that you can you can chalk it up to this kind of politics being so toxic to the faith is in the way that if you're a Catholic and you want to see a reunion of the Orthodox churches with the Holy See, and this was not helpful. In
Yeah, I
fact,
bet.
this is now a permanent legacy that will be a barrier to some people, especially those who lost loved ones, um, or maybe lived in the areas where these places were destroyed. Maybe they were, forced to, or they were told stories. Their children and grandchildren were told stories about digging the mass graves. This is the kind of stuff you're dealing with.
Yeah. Yikes. All right.
That's enough.
Yeah.
We're gonna just
This is the
end
most
it.
depressing episode ever.
Yeah, not good.
Yeah.
Um,
So maybe
I
next week we should do something that's a little bit more cheery.
yeah, not really easy to do with a book like this, but we'll find something. Maybe I can't think of anything right now,
Yeah.
but we'll find something that isn't this. We certainly won't
Yeah.
do Tizo next.
Yeah. Right.
Just have the Tizo episode is just like is who can write the best love note to Hitler. Oh man, I took a long time finishing the Slovakia section because I knew I was gonna have to write the Croatian one if I finished.
Mhm.
It's just this nightmare. So we won't do that to you guys. I do not anticipate this being the most listened to section. One last time, just as a blanket statement, I want to apologize for not knowing how to pronounce these names. I did all the work out of books, and the books don't tell you how to pronounce the names. And I do not study Balkan politics or history. I'm an Americanist
Yeah.
who became incredibly disturbed by post-liberalism and its legacy, and so I have come to this seeking to do due diligence on the academic history of the discipline, but I cannot do my due diligence to the linguistic part. I just can't. I'm so
Yeah. I
sorry.
mean, it's almost a running joke at this point that you and I have just given up on pronouncing all these
I
things.
can't even say your last name correctly.
Yeah.
If
Yeah. No, it's all good.
you want to have good pronunciation, do not grow up in East Texas. This is
Yeah.
not
Well,
not the place.
but I guess maybe next week maybe we could do a greatest hits of contemporary post liberals. That's kind of fun. Sometimes that's funny
Yeah, yeah. We
because
could do
they
something.
don't murder anyone yet.
No, no, yet.
And we're trying to help them not murder anyone. So we're just gonna,
Yeah,
we're helping them
we're
out.
really on their side in the
Yeah.
end. All right, Thomas. I'm gonna go take a shower. Maybe say a rosary for the grave sins committed in the name of of Christ and His church. Um, and maybe I'll be sort of emotionally recovered enough. Just as a book update, we're nearly finished with the last substantive chapter.
Yep.
Thomas is helping write out where we have the connections, direct sort of connections between contemporary post liberals and people like Bonald and Marat and
Mhm.
Voulot and all these sort of other thinkers that emerged I'm finishing the section, or have mostly finished the section that shows that they use the same arguments.
Yeah.
And after that, I need to make some revisions to the introduction to feature more history and the conclusion, and then we'll have a finished draft. So
Oh, okay.
we're about I'd say about 3 to 5,000 words away from finished, which is great because that'll be just in time for my baby to be born and
Mhm.
completely tank any productivity and my semester at my new job starts and everything intervenes so that nothing will be done and the book will come out in 2028. Here's to that not happening. Next week we'll talk about something less depressing for the 3 people who are still listening because you forgot to press pause, uh, or fell asleep, or just ran away from these horrible stories. Thank you for listening. This has been the Why Postliberalism Failed podcast. Thank you, Thomas.
Oh, remember to subscribe and to follow and all that stuff too. So,
Oh yeah, uh, that.
yeah.
Goodbye.